Well, welcome everyone. I'm Tracy Cook with the Montana State Library, and I have the pleasure of introducing today's presenters for the Facilities Management for Libraries webinar. We have with us today Robie Culver and Clint Smith, who work for Stahly Engineering and Associates, and both of them have a wealth of experience in the realm of facilities management. Robie is a grant writer, administrator, and community planning facilitator. So she works very closely with communities around Montana to develop master plans, to help them with growth policies. Clint has a passion for helping clients have high quality construction projects and to end up with something that really works well for them. And he gives them advice as they're working through the process. I happened to luck out and meet Robie and Clint via a Glacier County Library board meeting. They've been doing some work up there. And I was so impressed with them because they had a way of just explaining the concepts. And I told them earlier, as we were chatting before this webinar, that they made it seem doable. Like it was accessible and it was something that we could all do. And knowing how so many library folks kind of inherit managing this public building and you may not have that experience, I reached out to them to see if they would be willing to share their expertise with you. And thankfully they said yes. So with that, Robie and Clint, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to visit with everybody. We've done, as an engineering firm, we work with libraries throughout the state. We've done a few projects in Lewis and Clark County. I've done a CIP in Bighorn County, Browning Library. As you mentioned, we're working with the Glacier County folks. Judith Basin County Free Library is one of our past clients. And then library in Anaconda, we helped with some structural stuff there, and we're working on the Belgrade Community Library right now. So we've done a few library projects, and so we believe that the library is the center of our communities, and so we have definitely a place in our hearts for your libraries. Next slide, please. There we go. We're going to talk today about, where to even start when you have the responsibility of a facility. Where do you start with trying to figure out what needs to happen to make sure that the maintenance of that facility is happening and the building is cared for a long time into the future. We'll talk about how you can plan to do some projects to do improvements and upgrades. And then finally, with the help of our friends at the State Library, we'll talk a little bit about the resources that might be available as far as funding for your project.
Welcome, good afternoon. I'm Clint Smith with Stahly Engineering, and just like to thank you all for joining in today. Real big question, where do you start? You've got a new facility and now you're in charge of it. You may have experience, you may not, but this will hopefully give you some background of some items and some tools to help facilitate the management of a facility. I'll follow up with a couple examples as we go through, but really it's when you start out, it's that inspection and inventory of your library, not only of the books and everything that staff are doing, but the access into it, your grounds outside, the building, the sprinkler systems, the inside, the stairs, elevators. There's so many different aspects of a facility that a lot of people don't realize. So it's knowing all of that. It starts with the documentation and the inventory. So you might have property, a plat with some restrictions. You want to gather that information, know where the water, the sewer come into the building or out of the building for any of those types of repairs. Understand what your responsibility for sidewalks and parking areas, which includes some of the ADA, which we'll kind of touch on, but we could spend a few days just on ADA alone within a facility. So it's that inspection and inventory. We've got listed up here a few of the items: heating, cooling systems, windows, structural integrity, the ADA compliance, hazardous materials, plumbing, floors, walls, fixtures. That's just a start. So documentation of that, who is coming to your facility as your plumber, as your electrician, as your groundskeeper, as your contractor. So keeping those on file, as well as a record of what work has been done or you see in the future to be done. Here's an inspection and inventory checklist, just a portion of the document that we put together that'll help guide in the inspection inventory on there. That's the initial step. That'll help save a lot of money down the road when you do need the assistance of an architect, engineer, contractor, by having that documentation of the building. So we've provided that, and the full document will be available to you. And there's several different types and styles out there. This one was an easy one to be able to put forward for you, but a general room checklist, the questions on the left, any yes, no comments, and then kind of the list on the right there: exterior doors, buildings, the protection roof, those types of things. On the back of the very last page of it, it's open for items, comments. That way, as you're going through inside as well as outside of your building facility, you can write down the questions, take lots of pictures, and that's very valuable, bringing that information forward to the engineers, the architects, to be able to describe what issues you may have and to help prioritize what issues you may have with a facility. And the next page here is it's kind of the ADA evaluation. Again, we could spend a day, 2 days on ADA evaluations. And we'll kind of touch on that a little bit later within the presentation here of if an architect would come in and do that type of work for you based on some funding requirements.
The nice thing about that checklist that we're going to provide is that it tells you what the actual suggested ways to make your building accessible is. So it's a pretty helpful checklist, even if you're just doing it on your own, to look at, to make sure that the facility that you're responsible for is accessible. Back up, you know, some of our experience with like the library in Browning, they've had some issues up there, and we were able to go up and take a look and kind of figure out, look at their mechanical systems, look a little bit at some of the damage that had been done by water in their facility. And so that was kind of where we ended up meeting Tracy. We'll get there, Austin, right? Someday. So once you've kind of done your own self-evaluation, you might see a need to hire a professional to help you do a capital improvements plan. You can do this specifically for your facility, or sometimes you can tag on to like a county's capital improvements plan. That's what happened in Glacier County. They were able to get their building put on the capital improvements plan for the county, and it kind of brings it to the forefront of what needs to be done there. And it always helps with, if you're looking for funding sources, having that plan in place of what needs to be done is pretty important. I've also done a capital improvements plan in Bighorn County, for example, that was just specifically for the library. And basically what that does is it helps you to develop a project list. You can take your known issues from your building evaluation, And then also talk to your staff, talk to the public, what kind of programming goals or outreach efforts need to be done to prioritize the projects that, or identify and prioritize the projects that might be done to help make your building last longer or be more attractive to the public. So that comprehensive capital improvements plan not only will be a project list, but also if you have professionals helping you with that, an engineer, an architect, they can help you with coming up with costs for things, and then they help you set goals for timing of the project. You want to utilize your staff and maybe your library board to prioritize those projects. We usually include some ideas for funding sources, and then it should be reviewed yearly. The thing about people are always scared that if I tell them they have to prioritize their projects, that well, then I have to do one before I can do 6. And that's absolutely not the case. Once you're reviewing it yearly, you can move your priorities. You can, if funding comes available for a certain project, I always encourage people not to worry about where it's at on the list, but make sure that if you have the opportunity to move forward, you do. And the fun thing about the yearly review is you go back and you look and you say what got done, what didn't get done, and you can celebrate the wins and set your priorities for the next year. So once you've identified some projects that you need to do, then the next step is, of course, project implementation. And what that takes is usually procurement of professionals, architects or engineers, and then contractor services. You are probably all aware of the procurement laws for the state of Montana, and you need to make sure you're aware of anything locally, whether that's if you're under the purview of the county or whatever, what their policies are as far as procurement. As far as the state is concerned, you can procure professionals for projects under 50,000 without going through a full RFQ process. I always suggest that you still do a limited solicitation where you just try to get quotes and ideas and qualifications from at least 2 or 3 firms to find out who the best fit is for you. And the same goes for contractors. If it's a small project under $80,000, you don't have to go do bid documents, do all that. You could just hire that person unless your local procurement procedures are different than that. But anything over 80,000, you do have to go out to bid for that. You have to have bid documents. So that generally would require an architect or an engineer to help you with that. So also, if you're going after grant funding, you'll more than likely want to have a preliminary architectural report or a PAR. And those guidelines that I have that link to are from the CDBG, or the Community Development Block Grant website. And they have a general outline for a preliminary architectural report. And that report may not be as important if you're going after private funding, but certainly for any public funding, you will need a PAR. And a PAR is also just a good document to have, because that professional can help you define your problem, figure out what needs to be done. They can provide an alternatives analysis, whether that means, remodel something, improve your HVAC, or I don't know, in some cases, I suppose, tear the building down and start over, or find an alternate location to house the library. That PAR will also provide cost estimates, so then you can start thinking about what kind of funding you need and what your funding strategy will be. And finally, they will create an implementation plan that will help guide you in getting it done. That'll include maybe a proposed schedule, proposed funding, whatever else you need to implement that plan. So some of the resources, you probably all know as well as I do, but certainly there's local mill levy and general fund allocations that libraries get and how to do that. And your friends at the state library are probably way more experienced at that piece than I ever will be, or maybe even want to be. So, and then you also know that you get some state and federal funding. There are some federal funding. There are some federal funds, grant funds available. Usually those federal grants are a little difficult to receive and to manage, but they are out there. And if you have a big project, it's worth looking into. As far as more local funding that I'm aware of is the Community Development Block Grant does provide money for public facilities, including libraries. So that's an option. I think Tracy and I talked about this a little bit, that she has been under the impression that the CDBG program is interested in helping at least with the ADA upgrades that might be required for a library. So if you have a project that you need to fix your front entrance, or you need to redo bathrooms or do something like that, CDBG might be a good option there. In communities, however, CDBG only provides funding to communities that have at least 51% low to moderate income individuals in their communities. So you'll need to check that. And the Commerce website also has that information where you can put the name of your county or your town in, and it will help you determine whether or not you have 51% LMI individuals in your community. And as are many libraries in Montana are historic properties, the Montana Historic Preservation Grants are a good option for libraries. And so that's a source of funding that provides up to $500,000 in funding to help preserve your historic building. And then you all have probably some knowledge of the community, the different private funding sources that are out there, community foundations. There's a Montana Community Foundation, but also foundations throughout the state of Montana that help provide some grant funding. Other private ones that I could think of were Steel Reese, there's Otto Bremer, the Tracy Foundation, and the Gianforte Foundation. There's a couple others that I didn't put on there, like Northwestern Energy, that can help with like energy audits, and then also with helping you to install energy saving infrastructure. That's what I want to say. And also DEQ, that's the one we're kind of familiar with Browning. They've discovered there's some hazardous materials, lead paint, and asbestos and all those things that are also in older buildings. And DEQ can assist with both evaluating those hazardous materials if you have a project going on, and can also help you mitigate some of those hazards. So that works pretty well. I was actually surprised to see that Intercap, the Board of Investments, will provide loans to libraries, and those are usually pretty short period loans. They're like 15 years, I think. But sometimes they can provide a cheaper source of loan funding than a regular local bank. So yeah. And it looks like Colay's putting all kinds of links in there to help us with that. So with that, anything more, Clint, or do we want to just take questions?
And I think open it up for any questions that anybody may have.
you're welcome to put those in chat, or if you have a question that you'd like to speak up and use your microphone, please feel free to do that as well.
While people might be typing in chat, I think one question I have, Robbie and Clint, is kind of understanding the relationship between the capital improvement plan and the preliminary architecture report. So if I'm understanding this right, the capital improvement plan might be something that you do on your own or with perhaps another contractor to kind of identify everything that needs to be done to your building. But a preliminary architecture report, when I've worked with libraries that are using that, it's usually like almost an overhaul of their entire building. Is that actually how that works? Or could you talk maybe a little bit more about how those two are related?
Yes, I can. So a capital improvements plan, you're absolutely right, is a list of all the things. And usually you set a dollar amount, you know, if it's a maintenance thing, you know, if it's, we got to get new curtains for that window over there because they're falling down, that's a maintenance thing. If it's something over like $5,000 where you need to totally revamp a bathroom or whatever, but in general, so that's a whole list of projects that would be considered capital. And so again, that's up to you as far as your board or your staff to figure out what's that threshold that we can just either spend our budget on normal maintenance, or is this really a big project that we're going to have to look for funding for? And usually that's the difference, is what you need to get outside funding for that you wouldn't have in your regular everyday budget. So basically that's it, having that whole list of plans and making sure that everything that's in there is in there that might possibly come up over the next 5 years. I would do it as a 5-year plan. Have all that in there. And what helps there is that then when you finally see a big project that needs to be done and you need to hire an architect for that, then that's when usually a PAR isn't done just for some small project, but sometimes it can also be done as a master planning document. A PAR could be done as a master planning document. Here's some alternatives to how you might change this room or do something different. So there's lots of reasons to do a PAR, but in general, I see it being done because you need a lot of money and you need to prove that you've done your homework to make sure that that's the right project for the library.
Okay. Thank you.
Here we've got a question.
Yep.
Using our whole drive.
Qualify as a nonprofit. I'm assuming, Carly, that problem comes more with private grants than with public grants.
She says yes.
So public grants are looking for a 501c3. So I guess, Colette, do you have some thoughts on how you get around if it's I'm assuming that your grant or your library is funded through a county.
Carly's library is actually one of the few independent library districts. And the funding does go through the county. Most libraries, Carly, of course, the way they get around that is they have a library foundation. But in the back of my mind, I thought that the Judith Basin Library might have taken advantage of the Montana Community Foundation when they were building their library. And like the Montana Community Foundation kind of created an account for the Judith Basin County Free Library. And I think it was pretty slick. I mean, it worked very smoothly. And so that could be another possibility as a partnership with the Montana Community Foundation. The other thing is sometimes you can fight the battle of libraries do technically fall under the IRS's definition of nonprofits, but it's not 501c3, it's slightly different. And so you can try to make that argument as well. And Alyssa's correct. If you have a foundation in Friends of the Library, it can sometimes apply on behalf of libraries. And then if there's nothing more on that one, it looks like Starla has a question. And sometimes this does happen where a library wants to go one direction and a town or a county thinks something else should happen with the building. And I guess she had the very practical question of like, is vinyl siding better than steel siding, or is steel siding a good choice? And she was wondering if Clint had an opinion on that.
Yes, absolutely. Recommendation now with the improvements of the steel siding, Bridger Steel. There's some other siding places out there that provide this steel, very decorative. You're seeing it on a lot of homes, a lot of high-end homes, interior as well as exterior. So I do recommend that. It's a cost difference between the vinyl siding as compared to the steel siding, but the steel siding should be a 30-year siding for you to be able to utilize as an option. So I do recommend it.
Thanks, Clint.
They might be thinking it would look like a calving barn or something. I don't know what you might be doing. You need to make sure it gets designed in a way that says this is a library, not a calving barn.
Yep. It's hard to know if it's cost or looks that sometimes is driving people's decisions.
Yeah.
All right, looks like we have another question from Tiffany. And she says, if you have a PAR through an architect, would you suggest working with that architect throughout the whole process? Believe capital improvement plan, construction, etc.?
Thanks for that question, Tiffany. First of all, if you're happy with your architect throughout the planning process, then I would absolutely recommend that, because then they're going to know your building. You don't have to start over with somebody else. The new architect isn't relying on some potential preliminary designs that they're like, we don't want to use this architect's designs. So as long as you're happy with how they communicated with you, or how, you know, how they delivered the product that you were looking for, I guess I want to say, then I would keep them there. And that's a good question, because if you're trying to decide, do I just hire this architect for, because they say they'll do it for $49,999 and we won't have to go out for procurement. The nice thing about getting your procurement done ahead and making sure that within your document for procuring professional services, you say, if, you know, as desired by the Conrad Public Library, we may retain the services of this architect for final design and construction administration. That way you don't have to go out again and hire your architect. So from a procurement standpoint, it makes the whole process a little easier to get that all done at once. But again, you're never committed if your relationship with that architect doesn't seem to be positive. Automatic door pricing.
That is, hi Starla, that is a good question. I could look up to see if there's any existing vendors and then send that information to everybody here on the team. Where is your library located at?
She's in Hot Springs.
Hot Springs. One, I would say Jackson Contracting out of Missoula, they would be able to source and find some good automatic door pricings in that local area as one of the contractors in that area. So I could even call them, or I can look that up and see if I can send the information to you.
I'm trying to think if we have any lately that we did.
We'll kind of keep going here. If there are any other questions that you want to put in chat or speak up, I do want to just kind of go through our last couple of announcements and things before we wrap up. We have lots of information and sources for you to check out on the MSL website and various places for upcoming webinars. We will have the recording for this session available in the YouTube channel. Probably a little bit later this afternoon, along with all of those great resources that were shared with us today. I shared the link to our evaluation survey that is available here if you want to snap a picture of the QR code, or the link, like I said, is in the chat. We have focus on collection management and technical services in the next month. So we're going to be going through MSL reference services and then demonstrations of searching Montana collections in the Internet Archive. Those are coming up in February. And if you have any questions, and certainly as there are additional resources that our great speakers today want to share with us, they'll be able to share those back out with you. Yeah, just want to make sure that if we have any other questions, that we're going to take time to have you ask those, and really appreciate both our speakers' time and expertise, as well as everyone's attention here today. Starlet, yes, you should, but if not, I'm going to post all of the links from the chat into the Aspen event. So you'll see those along with the recordings and the PowerPoint slides and the checklists. Yes, Emily, it's like the occupational hazard. Each time we get together, we share so many links in that, but just know that I'm harvesting those, and if you want to just email me too, I can share those out with you quickly, but try to get everything put into that Aspen event in particular. Awesome. Well, hearing no further questions at this time, thanks again so much, Robbie and Clint. We appreciate you so much. I'm so glad that we had a chance to get this
Thank you.
on the schedule, and I know that we'll be back in touch potentially with more questions.
That sounds great.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks so much.